So, in the past 24 hours, we've been tagged to give an opinion on Stanley Coren's article on the barking more than a dozen times. We figure if it's important to you, it's important to us, so let's take a look. So who is this Coren fella and why are we so bothered about what he's saying? Well, Dr. Stanley Coren is an American dog psychologist who received qualifications not in canine behaviour but in human psychology, and he was a pretty prolific researcher for many years, publishing not only secondary data by the way of books but also primary research on some interesting topics such as sleep deprivation in humans as well as left and right-handedness. This actually earned him an honorary doctorate from the University of Guelph for his scientific and literary contributions. During this time, Coren deviated from the subject for which he was best known and moved into the topic of dog behaviour. In 1994, he published The Intelligence of Dogs, which received mass applause after some controversy around the writings where he references unpublished data from a survey he sent out to all of the dog obedience judges in the United States and Canada, and then used it to rank 110 dog breeds by intelligence. This shot Coren to the limelight, and after this he stuck mainly to publishing books and articles with unpublished data. The Intelligence of Dogs has since been translated into 26 different languages and has gone through 16 printings.
The reason that it's important that we look at someone like Stanley Coren is that not only has he got mass and mainstream audience through his award-winning books and his regular blog published by Psychology Today, but he's also well respected. Not just for his opinion or for his dog training, but for his science-based take on things. Having starred in TV shows and received numerous awards for his research in psychology, Dr. Coren was named as a Fellow for the Royal Society of Canada and a Killam Senior Research Fellow. He was also an elected Fellow for the American Psychological Association, the Canadian Psychological Association, and the Association for Psychological Science. And he's not just well received by the human psychology lot. He's received many accolades for his dog training books, including Writer of the Year by the International Positive Dog Training Association. And he received the Red Cedar Book Award, as well as being named in the top 10 Canadian books for his kids' books. Along with his respected position as a child's canine educator, the particular blog series that we're about to discuss was awarded a Medal of Excellence. So, as people who work very hard to help the public remain up to date in their thinking about dogs, we count on Stan. And in the past, whilst I've had my fair share of frustrations regarding his misworded suggestions or scientific leaps regarding what a study actually says, in the main, he's been approximately on track until now.
One of Coren's most mainstream gigs is his regular blog posts on the website for the magazine Psychology Today. This is an extremely popular publication. The magazine was founded in the late 60s when psychology was popularised and reading pop psychology was very en vogue. It was one of the top 10 consumer magazines in 2011, and whilst many magazine sales decreased as people moved online, Psychology Today steadily rose. PsychologyToday.com is ranked number 1 in global ranking for mental health publications with 26.9 million visitors last July. Yesterday, the 14th of August 2020, Psychology Today released an article called A Quick Fix for a Barking Dog. It's always going to be a popular article. Barking is one of the top 3 problems owners face, and Stop My Dog Barking comes up as an extremely popular search term. So much so, particularly at the moment, that we worked on a video for a well-known company to help their employees deal with that problem, which can be found on YouTube.
The title, A Quick Fix for a Barking Dog, will already have some of you professionals' backs up. Arguably, though, this is a title which can be seen as a marketing tool, much like the popular and heartbreaking post I Killed My Dog Today, or even my own show, How to Train Your Baby Like a Dog. However, in reality, to modern dog behaviourists, quick fixes are considered unrealistic and usually point to harsh punishment and short-sighted suppression techniques. In fact, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the ASPCA, specifically called out quick fixes as unrealistic when it comes to reducing or preventing barking in the home, mainly due to the plethora of motivations which underlie this usually very natural behaviour. That said, there is no scientific data that suggests that quick fixes are indeed unethical, and there is no specific data to my knowledge that looks at the long-term effects of a quick fix over a long fix. So with that in mind, we can forgive the title as a marketing tool. In paragraph 1 and 2, he sets the scene. He explains that bouts of barking don't really bother him, but that since the pandemic and many people working from home, he's getting more and more complaints as people at home start to notice their dogs barking more. He uses the example of his friend Wilson and his border collie, Chester. A description is used in the second paragraph to draw the reader's attention to the author's credentials in my best clinical psychologist voice. This common writer's trick reassures the reader that the author is well qualified, and by using his credentials, he adds credibility to the whole of his article.
Our second clue that something was different was his use of the term master. Stanley Coren isn't a spring chicken, and perhaps master is just an old-fashioned term, but generally most practitioners, and indeed the vast majority of academic researchers too, use terms like caregiver or handler. Owner is even in some groups frowned upon, but master? This outdated terminology would certainly put many dog trainers off, because we stopped calling owners masters in the early noughties, when the original dominance author retracted his initial ideas about the formulation of wolf packs. But also advancements in canine science taught us that dogs and wolves behave very differently, and also that dogs didn't think that humans were dogs. Coren goes on to suggest that the dog hears the leader of the pack shout and thinks that it's him agreeing and barking. This is the third, more startling example of outdated theory.
In 2013, Springer's journal Animal Cognition published work by Dr. Dominique Outira-Derian from LEEC and from the National Veterinary School in Lyon in France. Her and her colleagues looked at how dogs use sight to discriminate between dogs and other animals. They used a computer and they showed the dogs pairs of faces from different species. The dogs were first taught to pick out the dog face using a conditioning exercise with a clicker and treats. The dogs were then shown different pairs, including different breeds of dogs that they hadn't been trained on, to see if they could generalise, and they were able to understand that the dog was what was being rewarded. Indeed, the 9 pet dogs that were used in this study could clearly discriminate visually between dogs and other species, including humans.
But let's forget about sight for a second and think about scent. The world of social olfaction is a rich tapestry of information which we're crap at thinking about, mainly because our olfactory talents lack the prowess of our canine superiors. But we do know that dogs' behaviour, and especially social behaviour, is inextricably linked to the canine world of olfaction. The question of whether dogs can discriminate the odour of a dog from the odour of a human, for anybody that's done the Scent for Six course, which is our olfaction course, will know it's a laughable question. As soon as you get to grips with just how brilliant and complex the world of scent is for a dog, the simple discrimination task would be like asking Albert Einstein to recite his 3 times table. Modern scientists have been able to show that dogs can not only discriminate between the sweat of individuals, they can identify that sweat successfully when it's mixed with another person's sweat. They also appear to categorise human odour, being able to pick out one twin scent when compared to another twin, but then indicating on the untrained twin scent if the trained twin's odour isn't present in the sample.
So I want you to imagine writing this on a post-it and then sticking it to the corner of your brain while you watch the rest of this analysis. There is no doubt that science has shown us that dogs perceive a difference between dogs and people, and that dogs don't think that people are dogs, or that dogs are people. Schumann et al. Found that as early as at 6 weeks old, a puppy can follow the pointed finger of a human. Dogs also follow our gaze even around an obstacle to a reward. Dogs are socially very, very competent when it comes to living and communicating with us humans. They know when we're talking to them and when we're saying the same words but we're talking to someone else. They don't communicate with us the same way that they communicate to dogs. An example of this might be the use of a fixed gaze, which, as Handelman points out in the Dogwise Photo Handbook, fixed eye contact is markedly different when used towards a human than towards a dog. As Makosi and Topple point out in their 2013 paper, through the domestication process, dogs have modified the functional meaning of typical behavioural patterns to adapt to a cross-species communication, acquiring a human-like communication mode. What that means, folks, and it's time for a second visual brain post-it writing moment here. Dogs don't interpret human communication the same way as dogs, and they communicate differently to humans than they do to dogs. These 2 scientific punchlines are fundamental to so much of today's understanding of dogs. They underpin the very nature by which we live with them and train them. Relationship, respect, and mutual understanding is what guides a modern dog trainer's approach, be them from a more punitive, a balanced, or a positive school of thought.
Additionally, the very core of what Coren is saying turns a blind eye to the studies dedicated to how dogs process language. For example, Daniela Ramos, a veterinary behaviourist in Sao Paulo, discovered that a mutt named Sophia could also differentiate object names from action commands, suggesting these dogs attend to the individual meaning of each word. fMRI scans show that dogs process angry words, happy words and neutral words differently. And more interestingly, that they recognise words they know from pseudo words that sound like those words but don't actually hold any meaning. Dogs don't think that we're dogs, and they don't think that when we speak, we're barking. They know what we mean when we angrily say shut up. And research published by Flom et al. Would also suggest that by recognising Coren's mate Wilson's anger, Chester the dog also sees him as an untrustworthy in that moment. One more thing that I want you to have written on your brain in marker before we dissect the meat and recommendations in Coren's latest and quite frankly worst blog post for Psychology Today is dogs are not wolves. You do not have a wolf in your living room. When you take a puppy and a wolf and raise them similarly by humans and then put them to task, you'll find stark differences. Remember when we talked about dogs following the point and the gaze? Well, over time, wolves can be trained to do this, but they're still not very good at it. Furthermore, when presented with an impossible task, a dog's going to ask us for help. Our relationship with the dog matters to the dog, and he sees us as helpful. Science also suggests that whilst puppies can be sensitive to novelty in a domestic setting, that sensitivity reduces significantly between the ages of 6 and 18 weeks. Wolves, on the other hand, maintain this sensitivity. Additionally, studies of dominance hierarchies within dog groups and wolf groups have been compared with regards to food bowl behaviour in groups. It's been suggested that wolves are in fact more tolerant than dogs, and that dog social hierarchies are steeper than wolves, with dogs in a subordinate position and not attempting to eat from the bowl of a more assertive character, where wolves would have done. However, this is another chat for another day. What I'm getting at here is a much less complex notion, namely, dogs are not wolves.
So, dogs don't think people are dogs. Dogs interpret human communication differently to dog-human communication. Dogs communicate differently to humans than to dogs. Dogs have evolved to be very different social creatures than the wolf. Now, thus far, anyone who's involved in evidence-based or modern dog behaviour will be yawning. It's all very clear, yes, yes, yes. For many, these concepts have become quite boring. They've been built in since the 90s. So why don't they form the backbone of this award-winning mainstream academic come dog trainers article?
Well, initially, despite the title and the use of the word master, which could all be forgiven as tricks to include more traditional audiences, I was confused by the controversy surrounding the advice. He warns owners off adhering to advice from YouTube and correctly asserts that such methods as those which use water or lemon spray or fabric muscles to hold the dog's mouth closed are too harsh and can ruin a relationship. Plus, he points out these aggressive corrections could provide relatively short-term results. He also suggests that most barking has a meaning. Indeed, dogs are motivated to vocalise for many, many reasons, most of which are highly functional, including territorial barking, barking communicating a need to go out, attention-gaining vocalisations, frustration, boredom, hunger, and also pain. Idiopathic vocalisations are usually simply as a result of a behaviourist not being able to fathom the motivation, or a dog that's built up a habit, or finds it intrinsically reinforcing. Our views on this have been covered in our YouTube video, which looks at finding the motivation for a dog's barking behaviour and a few different strategies to modify that.
The fourth sign of worry comes from the mistake that dogs are the same as wolves. This is a big one. Coren started to persuade the reader that dogs are just like wolves. He explains how puppies in the den are allowed to bark, but when they start to leave the den to hunt with the pack, the barking becomes problematic. Now, make no bones about it. Most of these dogs who are barking in the offices of people who've been forced to work from home due to COVID-19 haven't been born in a den, and most certainly haven't ever hunted with their parents. Whether true predation even exists in the domestic dog is actually a scientifically debated topic, and a pretty hot one. Are dogs scavengers or hunters? Despite participating in hunting behaviour and often killing and eating prey, a dog's desire to do this isn't actually stimulated by hunger or satiation, so it seems. So whether we even call it predation is up for review. Again, another chat for another day. Either way, I've spoken to lots of breeders, as well as a few rescue puppy raisers, one of which has raised upward to 100 litters over the years, and none of them have seen a mother domesticated dog muzzle grab their puppy for barking. Coren Rend, a well-known Malinois breeder, adds, "I've never seen an interaction for barking, either good or bad. Barking never seems to get a reaction from the bitch unless the puppies were barking at something, in which case she might go and investigate. Indeed, I myself have fostered and raised a couple of litters and worked with plenty in rescue, and I've never observed this." Jessica Lonsdale, a breeder of 14 litters, agrees that although bitches muzzle grab, in every litter I've ever bred, it is calm and never aggressive. The dogs I breed aren't big barkers, but I've never seen a bitch or an older dog use a muzzle grab to silence a barking puppy.
Stanley Coren's description: the pack leader, the puppy's mother, and any pack member who is capable of exerting control can give the signal for silence. To quiet barking, the dominant animal places its mouth over the offender's muzzle without actually biting and then gives a short, low, breathy growl. The low growl will not be heard very far and it is in short duration. The mouth over the muzzle is not actually inflicting pain, so there is no yelping or attempts to escape. Silence usually follows immediately. That seems like a description from an outdated wolf ethology book and holds no relevance to our domestic friends. He follows this with the first turn of events, which crappy, outdated science turns into dangerous, outdated advice. Humans can mimic the behaviour as a simple way to tell the dog to stop barking when he's near you. Sorry, what? This made-up behaviour, which has zero scientific backing and which is very likely going to hold no meaning in the world of communication between puppies and their mothers, can be mimicked despite the fact that dogs know that we're not dogs and have a very different tolerance to conflict than wolves. To train them to not bark? He suggests with your dog on your left, slip your fingers under the collar with your left hand, and I'll quote, "Pull up on the collar with your hand, while your right hand folds over the top of the dog's muzzle and presses down. In a quiet and businesslike, unemotional tone, you then say, 'Quiet.'"
A study by Heron et al. In 2009 of 140 participants over a one-year period concluded that confrontational methods applied by dog owners before their pets were presented for a behaviour consultation were associated with aggressive responses in many cases. Furthermore, in 2018, Dodman et al. Looked at the use of confrontational interactions and problem behaviour, and they also found a correlation between both frequency and severity of problem behaviour and the use of confrontational training methods in a survey of 1,564 dog and owner pairings. Whilst the efficacy and long-term ethics of a skilled trainer using punishment or negative reinforcement-based techniques to train a system of consequences for behaviour modification is hotly debated, owners using such physical and punitive techniques based on an internet reading is not. It's a no-brainer for any trainer of any background.
In the last paragraph, and as perhaps an attempt to cover his own back, Dr. Coren then stipulates that you must be sure your dog is only muzzle grabbed when he's barking unnecessarily, which is as subjective as you can possibly be. Very little barking is necessary for us humans. My dogs don't need to bark when welcome visitors arrive. They don't need to bark when they are playing or when they're excited for their food. Our need for the dog to bark is a subjective stage which will lead to further unpredictable actions and possibly further destroying the dog's trust in their owner.
In our experience, such methods at best tarnish a relationship and at worst can cause severe redirection onto the hands or indeed the face of a person leaning over and holding their dog's muzzle repeatedly.
So, Dr. Coren, mate, I'm sorry, but you're wrong.